where John posed the question. I mean, you've spoken often in your career about how important it was for you as a young entrepreneur and innovator to come to America, and you've said there's no other country where you could have achieved what you've achieved today.
Definitely.
When you look at the U.S. today, the landscape, would that still apply in 2020? And are we broadly, as a society, doing everything we should be doing to foster that same environment that brought you here?
Yeah, well, I think U.S. is still great with respect to innovation and fostering entrepreneurship. Still great. I think we don't want to be complacent, and we want to say, okay, how can we make it better over time? And I think we want to be cautious about the gradual creep of regulations and bureaucracy. The rules and regulations are immortal. And if we keep making more every year and do not do something about removing them, then eventually we will be able to do nothing. This is very important, and I think not well appreciated. This is sort of like the slow boil of the frog. You know, his frog doesn't jump out because it gets just slightly hotter each year. We should be aware of this, I think, particularly at the state level.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about that because you've been running into that some in California. But let me ask in a broader sense. I mean, you've been working with government. You do business with government now. You've expressed strong feelings about government, pro and con, at different times, depending on the circumstances. But when you think through an innovation lens in the broadest sense, what's the right role for government? Like, what is the role? Where should government be a player, and where should it be hands-off? What's ideal in your mind?
Sure. A lot of the time, the best thing that government can do is just get out of the way. And so I'd say that's the default, probably the best thing to do. Then after that would be ensuring that there are not artificial monopolies, that there is a fertile ground for startups. And because what can happen over time is that you can get regulatory capture by large companies where they influence the regulators and the legislators to favor their situation, and then you have a forest of redwoods, and you just can't. The little trees can't grow. So we really want to have an environment that tends to favor smaller companies and startups. The big companies really don't need the support, but they will generally try to work the system to establish a monopoly of some kind. We should be wary of that. You know, in general, it's like I think we could consider changing the way we think of things from, say, capitalism versus communism. I apologize for the long answer, but I think this is kind of capitalism versus communism, and think more in terms of feedback loops. So is a given organization, does a given organization, government or commercial, have good feedback loop for the customer, whether it's the people as a whole or whoever the customers are. And if you've got like a duopoly or oligopoly, they're generally going to have a weak response to their customer. And if they're a monopoly, they're going to have the weakest response to the customer. And the reason that government, I think, is often the worst at responding to the customers being the people is that they're a monopoly that can't go bankrupt, or usually cannot go bankrupt. So there's not really a cleansing process for a government short of a catastrophe. So, I mean, if you want to complain about the DMV, what's the alternative?
Yeah. So a couple things to unpack there. First, I do want to, when you talk about redwoods dominating the air and smaller companies having a challenge, some people would hear that as being the situation in Silicon Valley today. I don't necessarily think that's what you implied, but is that what you see in Silicon Valley today?
Well, I think this is not a Silicon Valley problem. It's a general problem. I mean, if you look at, say, how many candy companies are there? Like, Big Candy is like consolidated into like 3 companies or something, and they also own all the dog food and the baby food. So it's like, when's the last time there was some good candy? What's the forcing function for a new candy bar? I haven't seen one in ages. So we got to watch this like consolidation that ends up resulting in lower responsiveness to the end customer. And like I said, it's like you can think of like in the limit, government is simply the largest corporation.
Yeah.
So there's some people, I think it's a false dichotomy to look at government and sort of industry as separate. Government is simply a corporation in the limit. It is the ultimate corporation with a monopoly. But then as you get closer to, like I said, a monopoly, as the feedback loop gets weaker and less responsive to the customer, that's where you have something which does not maximize the happiness of people, which should be our objective overall.
We had a couple of people last night at this event who are joining the Biden administration, a couple of the president-elect senior advisors. And clearly, one of the things heavily on their mind is sort of a new national industrial policy, for want of a better term. They talked about spending a lot more on research and development and fostering innovation, big government spending, basically. Is that kind of national industrial policy a good idea? Is that a good use of government right now in your mind? And if it is, where would you focus that kind of effort?
Well, it's government's responsibility to establish the rules of the game and then ensure that those rules are properly enforced. Like sort of like the referees on the field, and it's like football or something. Then you got the rules, and you got the referees. You got to make sure the rules are the right rules, and the referees are enforcing the rules. I think that's an important role for government to ensure that the rules are correct and that the incentives are what we actually want them to be for, like I said, the long-term maximum happiness of the people into the future. Where I think government does not do a great job is when they want to not just be a referee on the field, they want to be a player on the field. This does not end up in a good situation.
Picking winners and losers, that kind of thing.
I mean, effectively, government incentives do favor, like you're going to say, like, what are the rules of the game? This is obviously an imperfect analogy, but I do think it is a pretty good one, that you want the government to be carefully focused on ensuring the rules of the game are what we actually want them to be, that we're getting rid of old rules. This is very important, which is not occurring, and that the rules are enforced such that we have ethical behavior of companies. Now, there are times when you have an unpriced externality, such as the CO2 capacity of the oceans and atmosphere. So then, if that is not priced in effectively, then you can get behavior in industry behavior that does not that we think is arguably not good for the environment or not good for the future of the planet. Most of the time, provided pricing is correct, you will see correct behavior from private industry. So, that's like one example where if we effectively price carbon, we'll see the right behavior, and then the government does not need to try to pick technology winners and losers. They can simply incent the outcome. I think it's incredibly important that government focus on incenting the outcome, not the path.
You mentioned California, and I have to ask, you're in Texas right now, and there's been speculation, and you've been vocal this year on some of your frustration in California. Are you relocating? Is it happening? And can you talk a little bit about what's been troubling you in California so much this year since you mentioned it?
Sure. Well, first of all, Tesla and SpaceX obviously have massive operations in California. In fact, it's worth noting that Tesla is the last car company still manufacturing cars in California. SpaceX is the last aerospace company still doing significant manufacturing in California. So there used to be over a dozen car plants in California, and California used to be the center of aerospace manufacturing. My companies are the last two left. I want to emphasize, so that's a very important point to make. For myself, yes, I have moved to Texas. We've got the Starship development here in South Texas, where I am right now. We're hopefully going to do a launch later today. And then we've got the big factory development just outside of Austin for the Gig Texas development.
And you made the move really. Why? Why did you go there? Is it all a personal decision, or was it? It was partly a corporate environment decision, really, for the headquarters, isn't it?
Well, I mean, in my case, the two biggest things that I've got going on right now are the Starship development in South Texas, which was done. This was set in motion like 5 years ago, and then the big new U.S. factory for Tesla, which is called Giga Texas, just by Austin. So those are the two big projects. So these necessarily drive the use of my time here. Yeah, and then the other big thing for Tesla right now is the Giga Berlin. So I was in Berlin. I spent a fair bit of time in Berlin working on that. Yeah, I think there's California is great. So there's a lot of things that are really great about California. Obviously, it's the biggest economy in the country, most number of people. But I do think that there is something that happens when, if it's, go back to the sort of sports team analogy, like if a team has been winning for too long, they do tend to get a little complacent, a little entitled, and then they don't win the championship anymore. So California's been winning for a long time. And I think they're taking it for granted a little bit.